Proverbs 22, verse 28 says, "Do not move the ancient boundary which your fathers have set." Now, it turns out this is a proverb that is repeated a couple of chapters later, and then is just simply echoing one of the laws that was given in the early part of the Bible, is then repeated in one of the prophets. So there's 5 places in total where this, in the scriptures, where it makes this reference to this boundary and not moving the boundary marker, or not changing the boundary stone and whatever that was set by your fathers, this ancient thing, this ancient boundary. So it's there in the Bible, at least in 5 places. And so it's given to us as this instruction of something that's important in Proverbs as a wise thing, and in the law as a law of God, and by the prophets as a moral thing. And so we see this idea in Scripture of the importance of not moving the boundary marker. Now, in the specific context, it's talking about things like property lines and claiming each other's territory and stuff. So it's talking about that kind of thing. But it got me to thinking, as I read it the other day, it just got me to thinking about this idea of why is it that our culture thinks that boundaries are bad things? And it really does. I mean, you run into it a lot these days. There's this very anti-boundary thinking out there. I think a lot of it comes from this current infatuation with Marxism that's in our society these days, where this idea of the boundaries of countries and nationalism and whatever else, and whatever it is, somehow this idea has grown over the last few decades that boundaries are bad things, that we shouldn't ever have boundaries. You know, there's some parents that never want to say no to their kids. They'll actually tell their babysitters that we don't say no to our child, and they'll expect the babysitter not to say no, and so no boundary, right? There's this a funny obsession with this idea that boundaries are somehow bad. In fact, it goes so far that in our society, breaking boundaries is seen as a virtue. We'll praise people because they're cutting edge, right? Or we'll praise them because they were pushing the boundaries in some performance art, for instance. We'll actually say, and I've heard people say this, that in comedy, the whole point of comedy is to push the boundaries. And we'll get this idea that somehow boundaries, that it's not only is a boundary bad, but you're virtuous for breaking it and for pushing out against it. We take great pleasure in talking about the first of this and the first of that and the first person to do this and whatever else, and we're all about breaking boundaries. Now, some boundaries, I think I would agree, need to be broken. Other ones, though, I'm not so sure about. And enough that I would say that there's good places to break boundaries and bad places where we shouldn't break boundaries. And so it doesn't make sense for us to decide that boundaries are automatically bad or that it's virtuous to break them. I would say that it's not. It might be in some cases, but it's not as a rule. Let's do some examples of this. How can we think about this? Well, if you think about this, what kind of boundaries exist? Let's think about this idea of the boundary of inability. Let's say that there's something that we could do better if only we were able to figure out how to get past the boundary of what we've been able to accomplish. Like perhaps with transportation, you think about a car. And if we were able to build a better car, one that breaks the fuel ratio boundary or the speed, that's able to go faster. Back in the old days when they made the first cars and they could only travel whatever it was, 10 kilometers an hour or whatever it was, you know, they were very slow. And so then for people to innovate and to create new technology and to make a car that could go faster and then another car that could go even faster and break the previous speed boundaries of what could be accomplished. And then somebody thought, well, what if we pave the roads? Then cars could go even faster and we could actually improve our transportation efficiency. And breaking those boundaries, I would say, well, that's probably a good thing because we've been able to create a more efficient society and to accomplish greater transportation, you know, so trade could happen, all kinds of benefits. That's a good thing. That's a good boundary to break. The boundary of an overcoming an obstacle through our increased ability. That's wonderful. But then there's the safety boundaries. Then there's the whole idea of wow, these fast cars are kind of dangerous. If somebody walks out in front of one of these things, they'll die. Or if they crash, the people in the car are doomed. And so it became apparent that just because they had overcome the inability, that boundary of ability, it presented a new problem, which was safety. And so in the nations of the world, up went the speed limit signs. And it would say, this is the boundary. Don't drive faster than this. And the reason was safety. Breaking that boundary isn't a virtue. You're not a virtuous person because when you see that it says 110 kilometers an hour, you're going to go 160. No, you're not virtuous. You're actually putting yourself and everyone else around you in danger. You're very unvirtuous. Breaking the boundaries, isn't that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And this is the idea. And so we can't just automatically say boundary breaking is good in any field. Now that was a physical example. What about this idea of experience and exploration? Sometimes we can look at things and we can say, oh, we have a boundary, the human being that we once were contained to the land, and then we developed boats and we were able to cross oceans, and we found the new world, and then we developed planes and we were able to fly even further, and then we developed spacecraft and we were able to go to the moon, and we broke the previous boundaries of those limitations of the ocean, the air and space and gravity. And I would say, okay, that's great. Those are good boundaries to figure out how to break them. That's really neat. But then there comes moral boundaries with should we? Just because we can doesn't mean we should. Just because we have the ability to split the atom and create great amounts of energy doesn't mean we should use that to bomb somebody. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. It's not a virtue to break boundaries of moral codes. But in our society, breaking moral boundaries has become a virtue. We've decided somehow it's progressive to break the old ideas. This Marxist infatuation that the world is going through right now, the whole idea that we need to tear down all the old boundaries and build new ones. Well, we're moving the ancient boundary. And I don't think it's a good thing. Now, maybe in some places it should be, but just to do a wholesale teardown of every moral boundary that was ever put up, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing because it creates an immorality. It causes us to go into a place of sin. I guess, in a sense, we can look at it this way. If a boundary is in place that creates unity, that's good. If a boundary is in a place that prevents disunity, well, that's good in general. But it's not automatic. If a boundary exists to cause us to be good people, that's good. If a boundary exists to help prevent us from being evil people, that's good. Whether or not unity occurs, whether or not progress occurs, whether or not we overcome some obstacle or not, if the boundaries of moral right and wrongness are ever torn down, then all the rest of that becomes evil. No matter how good it feels or how much we like the outcomes of those things, it becomes evil. And eventually, even those outcomes that we thought were good, they'll turn out to be pretty bad. See, we need to understand that boundaries are very good things when they're done properly. And pushing the boundaries isn't always a virtue. So when you're tempted next time to talk about a boundary as something we need to overcome, just take a moment and think about it. Is it really? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I think it would do us well to take a moment and just consider it, think about it.